Hi, I'm Dr. Duncan Markham.
And I'm Dr. Debbie Lokes.
And we're Ear and Speak here in Melbourne, Australia. Today we're going to talk about...
Schwa.
Have you heard of schwa? I think everybody who's tried to learn English has heard of schwa. Unfortunately, it's not usually explained very well and it causes lots of confusion.
It's a challenging topic, I suppose, which is possibly why people often don't teach it well.
Yeah. So schwa is this tiny little vowel. It's like the most common vowel in English and the most seemingly unimportant one. It's just, most of the time,
Yeah, exactly.
So you'll see the symbol in the dictionary, in any decent dictionary, is an upside-down E.
That's right. But you don't see schwa written in books.
Yeah, in normal spelling. So normal English spelling, you cannot see schwa anywhere. And that's what makes it very hard to learn correctly, because you can't be sure where to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so... Now, we're only talking about the short schwa, the little schwa. There is a long version of that, which only occurs in emphasized syllables, things like nurse and heard and bird. We're not talking about that. We're talking about things like about.
And wanted.
Yeah, wanted, and my favourite, banana.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's two schwas in that one, beginning and the end, but not the middle.
Banana.
Oh, now you're being very Australian there, weren't you? So, in Australian English, just to make it a little bit more confusing, the schwa on the end of a word will often end up sounding quite a lot like ah.
Yeah.
And in fact, in very, very strong Australian English, you'd have banana. And I'm sure you recognise this, mother, father. Yeah?
Yeah, sister.
Oh, absolutely. So it can range quite a lot at the end of a word in Australian English. It won't often be just a really true schwa on the end. So it can range from something like mother, which is sort of schwa-ish but maybe not perfect, through to mother. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And either way, it's still a schwa.
It's still treated by the listener as a schwa.
Exactly.
If we want to get really technical, if we're talking about sounds, the schwa is just But there's also just the idea of schwa, which then varies a little bit. Unfortunately, because it's such a complex idea, sometimes you see some rather misleading information, especially on YouTube and other places on the internet. So I was watching a video recently by a guy probably in London, and he was trying to teach people about schwa, and he was using as the example the end of the word in cup of tea, but often people say cuppa. No, that is not a schwa, not in a million years. That is a great big fat cuppa.
Yes. Yeah. And a schwa, by contrast,
Yeah, so it would be cuppa.
Should we talk about the fact that schwa is often called a neutral vowel?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So this adds to the confusion as well. So often in textbooks and in some teaching, you'll see the schwa described as a neutral vowel. And so people kind of think it's not very important or that it's easy.
Exactly, but that's not the case as such.
No, any Spanish speaker who's tried to learn to do schwa will tell you that it is not easy, because often what they'll hear when you go is something closer to eh. And so when they try and speak English, they'll often replace what should be a good schwa with an eh. And speakers of other languages will do other similar sorts of things. There's nothing neutral about it. You need to learn it just like any other vowel.
And one of the things we haven't talked about too much is the fact that schwa is a short vowel, but it's an exceptionally short vowel.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah. And why is it so tiny?
Because it's unstressed.
Unstressed or unemphasized, depending on what book you've read.
Yeah. So we don't find it in emphasized syllables, for example.
Yeah. And sometimes people actually don't realise there's a vowel there, so they actually don't do any vowel at all, and the result is that they lose a syllable and they've changed the rhythm of the word, so that's also a disaster.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the other interesting things to mention is that you often find schwa in function words, so
Like prepositions and things.
the ones that aren't important. So we might find phrases like fish and chips.
Oh, yeah. So and. So and goes from being and to und with a schwa, and it can go even further and just become n. But let's assume we just have a schwa now. Und.
Fish and chips.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of things like that.
Yeah, and a word like but. So,
Oh, yeah. It easily becomes but.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's one thing I want to say. Yeah?
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
So to understand where to do a schwa, you have to understand the also fairly difficult concept of what emphasis or stress is in English. This is a really important characteristic of English, the fact that where you place a sort of power in the word helps people understand what word you're saying. If you take the word banana, my favourite word, it's emphasised in the middle. Banana. It's not emphasised because it's a long vowel. It's actually just English says that syllable has to be strong. It doesn't matter what vowel's in it, it has to be strong. And then the ones on the other side, on either side are tiny.
Yeah, and I often talk to people when I'm explaining rhythm and things like that, that while we have the emphasized syllable being important, sometimes it's the parts around it that actually help the emphasis sound more emphasized.
Precisely. So the contrast between really tiny
Exactly.
and really big. Yeah.
And that banana is a great case.
It is. So because that word also exists in some other languages, people are overly familiar with it, and because it's a fruit, so you probably learnt about it in school quite early, you'll have maybe learnt it wrong from the beginning, and it looks a bit unusual for an English word.
It does.
So all sorts of things can go wrong there. But if you say banana, an English listener can't tell where you've emphasised. You haven't got any schwas in there, so you're not helping them either. Really important to have that strength in the middle syllable.
And I guess what you've just touched on is that the listener might not identify the word, and sometimes it seems that the context will help you. That's true, but absolutely not always.
Yes.
So the schwa is aiding the listener in English.
Precisely. It's funny to think of it being such a tiny little thing, but it's crucial for speaking clear, understandable English.
Absolutely.
There are a few dialects that don't actually do schwa very much, and these are always dialects which have other language inputs. But for all the dialects of English which have, let's say, almost exclusively English in their makeup, that's so important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Is there anything else we need to say about schwa?
It's small but important.
There we go. I think we've got our message across. I'm Duncan Markham.
And I'm Dr. Debbie Lokes.
I forgot my doctor that time. Have a nice day.